What if I told you that America's most loved president lived a secret life so shocking it would ruin any politician today? We're talking about John F. Kennedy, the man who won hearts with his charm. But behind closed doors, he was running a network of secret affairs with women from Hollywood, White House workers, and even criminals. His wife Jackie knew about every single one. She watched as her husband held business meetings that were really romantic dates. She smiled for cameras while women half her age were swimming naked in the White House pool with her husband. One affair was so risky, it almost destroyed the entire Kennedy presidency. But here's the crazy part. One woman he supposedly slept with ended up murdered like an execution just blocks from the White House. Her diary was burned by the CIA. Another said she was pregnant with the president's baby. And wait until you hear about the 19-year-old intern who lost her virginity to JFK in Jackie's own bedroom. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these weren't just casual hookups. They were dangerous risks that could have brought down the most powerful man in the world. We're counting down every woman Kennedy supposedly had an affair with. And number 3 will make you question everything about Camelot. This was the 1960s, when the media protected politicians. Women had few choices, and power meant getting away with almost anything. Kennedy wasn't just any president. He was young, incredibly good-looking, with charm that drew people like moths to a flame. Jackie wasn't some clueless wife living in denial. She was smart and calculating, knowing exactly what her husband was doing. She once wrote that Jack was like her father, someone who loved the chase but got bored after winning, needing constant proof he was still attractive. Why did she stay? Why put up with public embarrassment and private betrayal? The answer might shock you. But first, let's dive into the women who supposedly shared intimate moments with America's most powerful man. Ellen Romick, the woman too dangerous to keep. Let's start with a name most people never heard, but one that sent shockwaves through government. Ellen Romick was a gorgeous German woman who looked like Elizabeth Taylor. She wasn't just any socialite. She was supposedly a high-class prostitute with access to Washington's most powerful men. Romesh was reportedly going to naked pool parties at the White House in spring 1963. But what made her truly dangerous wasn't her beauty or job. It was her background. She was German, married to a sergeant in the German army, and the FBI thought she might be giving information to foreign spies. The situation got so serious that Robert Kennedy personally stepped in. He had Romick quietly kicked out of the country before she became a national security nightmare. Think about that. The president's own brother had to cover up his affair because it threatened the entire country's safety. But Rome didn't go quietly. She knew secrets that could have destroyed not just JFK, but multiple high-ranking officials. Her sudden disappearance was so suspicious, it caught investigative reporters' attention. But the story was buried so deep, it didn't come out until decades later. Gunilla von Post, the love that almost changed everything. Now we're getting into territory that could have literally rewritten history. Gunilla von Post was a Swedish socialite who claimed a 6-year relationship with Kennedy starting in 1953 when he was engaged to Jackie. But this wasn't just another fling. This apparently went much deeper. According to von Post's memoir, their first meeting on the French Riviera was like a romantic movie. She described Kennedy kissing her under moonlight, making his eyes look bluer than the ocean. But here's the scary detail. This happened just 3 weeks before Kennedy was supposed to marry Jackie. What makes this explosive is what happened 2 years later. Von Post claims Kennedy actually told his father he wanted to leave Jackie to be with her. Imagine how different history would be if JFK had divorced Jackie for a Swedish socialite. The political consequences would have been catastrophic. But Joseph Kennedy Sr. stepped in and crushed those dreams, telling his son such scandal, and here's proof this relationship was real. Love letters between Kennedy and von Post were sold at auction in 2021, showing intimate details historians had never seen. One letter shows Kennedy begging von Post to visit, writing about their wonderful time together and how much he missed her. These weren't casual notes. They were desperate pleas of a man torn between love and ambition, fiddle and faddle, the White House secretaries. This is where Kennedy's affairs went from risky to absolutely reckless. Priscilla Ware and Jill Cowan were White House staff members who got nicknames Fiddle and Fatal. These weren't code names to protect identities. They were making fun of their job performance because everyone knew they weren't there to answer phones or type letters. The most telling detail involves wet hair. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Ware and Cowan at their desks with soaking wet hair after skinny dipping with the president in the White House pool. Picture that. The leader of the free world, splashing around naked with his secretaries while his wife was in another part of the building. But it gets more outrageous. Ware regularly went with Kennedy on official trips to Berlin, Rome, Ireland, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Nassau. Former Secret Service agents reported she rarely seemed focused on official duties. Instead, she was basically Kennedy's travel companion, paid for by taxpayer money. What makes this particularly disturbing is how obvious it was. These weren't secret affairs in private locations. This was the president showing off his cheating in America's most public building, with staff supposedly working for the American people. And here's the detail showing Kennedy's arrogance. Jackie knew. During a White House tour with a Paris Match reporter, Jackie pointed to Ware's desk and commented in French, admitting this was the woman sleeping with her husband. Jackie had to endure this embarrassment in her own home in front of foreign press, Marilyn Monroe. The affair that maybe never happened. Everyone remembers Monroe's sexy happy birthday, Mr. President at Madison Square Garden, on May 19, 1962. Monroe dropping her fur coat to show a skin-tight rhinestone-covered gown. Walking to the microphone with her signature breathy voice, the performance was so sensual, it immediately started romance rumors. But here's what most don't know. Kennedy and Monroe had very few chances to actually spend time together. Historians who studied their lives found that they may have been in the same place at the same time, on only a handful of occasions. The most likely opportunity for an intimate encounter was at Bing Crosby's Palm Springs home on March 24, 1962. Both were reportedly at a party there, and one of Monroe's friends claimed hearing what sounded like Kennedy's voice during a phone call with Monroe that weekend. But think about what this shows. If Kennedy and Monroe had a relationship, it was probably a one-night stand, blown completely out of proportion by decades of guessing. The idea of grand romance between America's president and Hollywood's biggest star is appealing. But reality was probably much more ordinary. What makes Monroe's story tragic isn't the supposed affair, it's what happened afterward. Less than 3 months after her birthday performance, Monroe was found dead from barbiturate overdose. Exactly 1 year later, Kennedy was assassinated. The timing has fueled conspiracy theories for decades. Judith Campbell Exner, the mob connection. Now we're reaching affairs that didn't just threaten Kennedy's marriage, they threatened national security. Judith Campbell Exner claimed a relationship with Kennedy lasting several years. But what made her dangerous wasn't intimate knowledge of the president. It was her other relationships. Exner met Kennedy through Frank Sinatra at a concert, which should have been Kennedy's first warning. Sinatra was already known for questionable connections, but Kennedy was so confident in managing multiple relationships, he ignored obvious risks. What Kennedy apparently didn't realize was that Exner was simultaneously involved with Sam Giancana, a notorious mafia boss. Think about the implications. The president sharing a mistress with organized crime. The potential for blackmail, leaked secrets, national security breaches was astronomical. But Exner's claims go further. She alleges serving as a go-between for Kennedy and Giancana, carrying messages and helping communication between the president and mafia. If true, Kennedy was using his mistress as a connection for dealing with organized crime while supposedly leading the fight against it. The situation became so serious, FBI surveillance was in vogue. LVEDJ Edgar Hoover briefed Kennedy about surveillance. forcing the president to end the relationship. Not because it was wrong, but because he'd been caught. But here's the detail showing Kennedy's recklessness. Exner claims she became pregnant with his child and had to get an abortion to protect his political career. If true, Kennedy was willing to end a potential life to preserve his public image. Mary Pinchot Meyer, the murder that silenced secrets. We've reached the most disturbing story, not just because of the affair, but because of how it ended. Mary Pinchot Meyer was an artist and socialite who supposedly had a 2-year intimate relationship with Kennedy. But what makes her story terrifying isn't what happened during their affair. It's what happened after Kennedy's assassination. Meyer wasn't just another conquest. She was intelligent, educated, socially prominent, similar to Jackie, but with adventurous spirit that apparently fascinated the president. What set Meyer apart was her intellectual curiosity and her willingness to challenge Kennedy on political matters. She wasn't happy to simply be another beautiful woman in his orbit. She wanted to understand the complexities of power and policy that drove his decisions. According to sources, she became Kennedy's confidant, someone who spent mornings in the Oval Office discussing important matters. But these weren't just casual conversations about current events. Meyer was reportedly interested in Kennedy's thoughts on everything from civil rights to foreign policy, and she wasn't afraid to offer her own opinions. This intellectual intimacy may have been even more dangerous than their physical relationship. Their relationship was serious enough that Meyer kept a diary documenting their time together. And here's where it becomes chilling. After Kennedy's assassination, Meyer became increasingly vocal about doubts regarding the official story. She publicly stated she didn't believe Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and she began asking uncomfortable questions about the circumstances surrounding the president's death. Meyer's skepticism wasn't based on conspiracy theories or wild guessing. She had been close enough to Kennedy to understand the political forces at work, the enemies he had made, and the dangerous games being played at the highest levels of government. Her questions came from a place of intimate knowledge that made them particularly threatening to those who preferred. The official story remained unquestioned. On October 12, 1964, just 2 days before her 44th birthday, Meyer took her routine walk along the Georgetown towpath. She was shot execution-style in the head and heart. Her murder has never been solved, despite happening in broad daylight in one of Washington's most wealthy neighborhoods. But here's where it gets sinister. Immediately after Meyer's death, her best friend contacted Meyer's sister and Ben Bradley, the Washington Post editor. The friend revealed Meyer had kept a diary that needed immediate securing, suggesting there was widespread knowledge that her writings contained sensitive information. What happened next reads like a spy thriller. The Bradleys rushed to Meyer's art studio only to find James Angleton, CIA's head of counterintelligence, already there with bolt cutters. The CIA was so concerned about Meyer's diary, they sent their top intelligence officer to get it before anyone else could see it. Think about the implications. The most powerful intelligence agency in America was breaking into a murder victim's private space to destroy evidence. The diary was eventually found, a notebook filled mostly with paint swatches and sketches. But there were pages hinting at an affair with an unnamed lover, and possibly more damaging revelations about what Meyer had learned during her time in Kennedy's inner circle. And here's the most chilling detail. Ben Bradley chose to burn the notebook, destroying potential evidence that could have helped police investigation. The message was clear. Mary Pinchot Meyer knew too much, and her knowledge died with her. Mimi Alford, the intern's shocking truth. If previous stories were disturbing, wait until you hear about Mimi Alford. In 2012, nearly 50 years later, Alford published a memoir that sent shockwaves through the historical community. Her story reveals Kennedy at his absolute worst, using power to manipulate and exploit a teenager with no way to resist. Alford was just 19 and had worked at the White House exactly for days when Kennedy first approached her. It started innocently. She was invited to join the president and staffers at the White House pool. But when Kennedy arrived and gracefully floated toward her, she knew something was about to change forever. What happened next was calculated seduction, showing Kennedy's true character. He invited Alford and other staffers for drinks in the West Sitting Hall. But as the evening went on, Alford found herself alone with Kennedy, exploring White House private quarters while Jackie and children were away for summer. Here's the devastating detail. Kennedy took Alford's virginity in what he ironically called Mrs. Kennedy's room. A 19-year-old intern 4 days into her job, losing her innocence to the president in his wife's bedroom. The power dynamics, the location, the complete lack of meaningful consent. It's horrifying when you think clearly. But it gets worse. After their encounter, Kennedy appeared completely unfazed, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. He called a car to take Alfred home, leaving her to deal with confusion and conflicting emotions alone. The relationship continued for 18 months with Alfred, eagerly awaiting Kennedy's calls whenever Jackie was away. She admits guilt never occurred to her then. In her 19-year-old mind, she wasn't intruding on Kennedy's marriage, but filling time when his wife was absent. But here's the most disturbing part. Alfred alleges Kennedy once forced her to perform oral sex on Dave Powers during a swimming pool gathering. She describes this as pathetic and sordid, something she can barely remember. When Teddy Kennedy made a similar request a year later, Alfred finally found strength to refuse. Jackie's choice. Why she stayed. Throughout this video, one question hangs in the air. Why did Jackie stay? Why did a brilliant, accomplished woman endure such public humiliation and private betrayal? The answer reveals something profound about power, politics, and personal sacrifice. In the 1960s, Jackie wasn't a victim. She was a participant in a carefully calculated arrangement. She understood her husband's charm and charisma. The very qualities making him an effective politician also made him irresistible to other women. Jackie had grown up watching her father engage in similar behavior. So, Kennedy's pattern wasn't shocking, it was familiar. She knew marriage wouldn't change his fundamental nature. But here's what makes Jackie's situation even more complex. She had options that other political wives didn't. She came from wealth, had her own social connections, and possessed the intelligence to build an independent life. Yet, she chose to stay, and that choice was strategic rather than emotional. Jackie understood the game better than anyone. She knew that leaving would mean losing everything she'd worked to build, not just her marriage, but her position in history. Divorce in the 1960s would have ended Kennedy's political career, but it also would have made Jackie the woman who destroyed Camelot. Instead, she played the long game with masterful precision. Jackie built her own mystique, becoming as much a part of the Kennedy legend as Jack himself. She turned her suffering into strength, her humiliation into grace under pressure. Every public appearance where she smiled beside her unfaithful husband was an investment in her future legacy. But Jackie also understood something the other women didn't. She held ultimate power. She was the wife, mother of his children, the woman history would remember. The affairs were temporary distractions, but her position was permanent and unshakable. She could survive any scandal because she was Mrs. Kennedy, not just another conquest. Jackie's choice to stay wasn't about love or devotion. It was about legacy. She was building something larger than marriage. She was creating a political dynasty that would outlast any individual transgression. The affairs were simply the price she paid for power, influence, and historical significance. She endured them the same way other people endure taxes, as an unfortunate but necessary cost of achieving something greater. In the end, Jackie's calculation proved correct. Today, she's remembered as one of America's most iconic first ladies. While most of Kennedy's alleged mistresses are footnotes in history books, what we've uncovered isn't just alleged affairs. It's a window into how power operates without consequences. Kennedy believed he was untouchable, that charm and charisma could protect him from any scandal. For the most part, he was right. The 1960s media protected politicians in ways seeming impossible today. Reporters knew about Kennedy's affairs, but chose not to report them. Secret Service agents witnessed inappropriate behavior. White House staff helped arrange encounters, but never spoke publicly. This culture of silence enabled Kennedy to take increasingly dangerous risks. From the German call girl who might have been a spy, to mafia connections threatening national security, Kennedy's affairs weren't just personal failings. They were potential disasters that could have changed American history. But perhaps most disturbing is what this reveals about power dynamics and consent. Many women in Kennedy's life were young, inexperienced, completely overwhelmed by his position and authority. They couldn't truly consent to relationships with someone holding such absolute power over their lives and careers. Looking back from our modern perspective, Kennedy wasn't just a charismatic president with a weakness for women. He was a serial predator using his position to exploit vulnerable people. The fact this behavior was normalized and protected reveals the corruption unchecked power creates. The Kennedy mystique continues fascinating us because it represents both the pinnacle of American political success and depths of personal moral failure behind. Camelot's glamorous image was a web of secrets, lies, and exploitation that ultimately cost multiple people their lives, reputations, and futures. As we remember Kennedy's legacy, we can't separate political achievements from personal failures. The same charm and confidence making him an effective leader also made him dangerous, using power to satisfy desires without regard for consequences. The women on this list deserve to be remembered not just as Kennedy's alleged mistresses, but as individuals whose lives were forever changed by encounters with absolute power. Their stories serve as warnings about what happens when charisma replaces character and power operates without accountability. What do you think about Jackie Kennedy's decision to stay silent about her husband's affairs? Was she complicit or making the best choice available to a woman in her position? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more deep dives into hidden stories of American history.